Okay, Tracy, thank you very much for joining me for this little chat this afternoon. As always, I'd like to give everyone sort of a brief history of yourself and who you are, what you do now, and how you got to where the journey you've taken to get you where you are now, doing what you do.
Okay, so I've been working a long time, so a long time. So not quite 40 years, but not far off of it. So yeah, I mean, predominantly my career's been in what we would probably call learning and development, education training, that type of area. So I started in NatWest and ended up, I was a regional trainer. So that was back in the day where we used to go to branches and train people in jobs at branch banking level. And then I moved into the Leadership Centre in London and delivered programs in leadership, management and personal development. Left there, went into the NHS where I was a senior manager at a large general hospital. I think it's probably the best description. And I centralised all budgets and led the whole education training agenda for that hospital. So that was a very strategic role. So that was really working with a team and looking at what we were delivering and how we were meeting the needs of the business, really, whether that's commissioning externally to universities or delivering stuff in-house through a training team. I have missed out a bit, actually. I worked in education before then. I was just trying to think. Yeah, I worked in education for about 6 years and learned quite a lot about GMVQs and MVQs, which then led me into the NHS. Left there in 2006, did a business psychology master's at the University of Westminster, went independent, at the same time joined as an associate consultant, Westminster Associates, and sort of set my own business up and worked as an associate. I've worked with sort of different companies very early on as an associate, but as I suppose I've developed what I like to do, I've worked sort of increasingly with Westminster Associates, and my own work is predominantly around women's development programs. And most of the other work now is with Westminster. So I'm an insights discovery practitioner. So I do a lot of work for them with the insights tool. And I'm also on the faculty for insights. So that's a sort of nutshell. But you're probably going to ask me about coaching. And one of my passions is I'm a British Rowing Level 2 coach. And I sit on the National Coaching Committee for British Rowing and the regional coaching committee for Eastern Region. So when I'm not at work, I'm quite often on the river, either training myself or coaching others.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, we will come on to the coaching bit, but if you excuse me. The first question would be what made you decide to go independent, to do what you started off doing as an independent consultant?
I think the thing is, I think I'd got to a point in my career. I mean, I was working in the NHS at a time, and it's not an organisation I visualised staying in till I retired. So it was part of the journey as opposed to the end of my journey. If I had stayed in healthcare, the next move for me would have been very much around operational management. So it would have either been going in as a chief operating officer. And I'll be honest, I thought that all sounded quite scary. and I don't particularly like ill people, so not a great environment to work in. But I think that's sort of passionate about how people learn. And I suppose the psychology side around people's behaviour, the culture of organisations. And for me, there was a drive around the diversity of working with different organisations. So now, you know, I can be in the public sector, I can be in the private sector, I can be in a national private sector company or an international private sector company. And I think for me, it's the variety that gives me in my own personal development, understanding different organisations. And I think what I've found is that's incredibly beneficial then to clients, because everybody does things that are good and everybody does things that aren't so good.
Yeah.
And you can pick, I suppose, the strands from all the sectors and all the organizations that seem to work to help other organizations.
Yeah.
From a personal perspective, I wanted more flexibility, really, and I wanted choice around who I worked with. And I have quite a strong value base, and I wanted to be working with organizations where I felt comfortable from a value perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so I wanted to get to the position where, you know, if an organization asked me to work with them, but there's something about the organization that doesn't sit comfortably with me, that I have the freedom to say, no, actually, you're not the right company for me to work with. And I think, you know, when you're employed, hopefully you're working for an organization that you believe in, one would hope.
Yeah.
But I suppose there is less freedom, and you're not seeing what else is out there, where now the clients I work with are so varied. I gain something from everyone, I think, that I work with. There's always something that I think, wow, that's good. And if I'd worked in one organization, I would never have seen it.
Yeah, no, so, it's really, really interesting fact, isn't it, or interesting point about your ability to have that variety, so you learn as well as helping others to learn as well. It's brilliant. Yeah,
which is important to me. Otherwise you go stale. Well, in my opinion, that is my humble opinion.
I'm very much in agreement with you. If you're not growing, you're dying, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moving on to the question I ask everybody that's done one of these, and you can take it wherever you wish, is, and the language is my language, so use whatever language that you want to use, but it's what is human performance? What does human performance mean to you? Both, and they'll be very intertwined because of who you are and what you do, both personally and professionally as well.
Gosh, that's an interesting question. Now I don't know what to answer there. Human performance. I think, so for me, in its sort of basic term, it's how we perform as human beings on a day-to-day basis. So for me, that would be around communication, relationship building, and the behavioural side of things. Then you've got another level, which is productivity, which links to human performance. So your output, but then I think that's driven internally from your behaviours, your thoughts, your thinking, your feeling. So your thoughts and feelings will lead to behaviours, which will drive performance. And for me, that drives productivity. So I think if you can get to a position where people are able to engage in the right way, but in a way that works for them, productivity will come. So I have this sort of thing that you can have all, you know, if you look at performance management, so it's a difficult term because I've used it and now thinking, well, it's not necessarily the way I would do it. But if you're monitoring people all the time and you're driving for performance, ultimately you may get it, but it feels a bit sort of carrot stick approach. I think if you can create the right conditions so that people naturally behave in a way that increases productivity, that is a far better way and a far better approach. So I have this thing that if an organization, for example, has a setup where its values are in line and its people are in line with the values, that people will perform at the level and produce what's required, sort of with little effort, if that makes sense, because everything's aligned. So I don't know if I've answered your question there, but I sort of...
Absolutely, you have.
Who knows?
No, you have, because it's your question to answer in your way. And that's why it is a very open question, and I do appreciate it. But it's the reason why I started to do these, because I've got this wonderful network of people who all do different things, but we're all trying to help others, essentially, in service to others. And it's just, I wanted to understand what everyone's perspective on the world is, of what they're doing around this human performance, performance of humans, to label off it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a bit like, if you can have a lot of conditions in place, you can drive positive your output will be positive from a performance perspective with little drive. I struggle with the approach of pushing people through holes. I want them to go willingly. Yeah. And I think if you can create the right conditions and the right environment, people will perform naturally. And I think for me, that's the key. And it's not always easy, because there's actually requires quite a lot of work around. I think it requires to start with looking at values, what's important to me. Is it important to the same? And I'll be honest, I've worked in some places when I was employed where I felt my values were out of line with the organisation, or I was asked to do things which couldn't be justified and didn't sit comfortably with me. So naturally, I'm not going to perform at my best. But if I can work in the conditions where it's like, if you can feed everybody all the basics, this book goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, actually. If you can get certain elements in place, I think performance happens.
It does. I agree. So leading on from that then, why are people like you and I in employment? Because it's simple yet complex from my perspective. What you're saying, it's aligning vision and values to achieve an outcome, which it's not hard to do, but it's hard to do. It's hard. It's a difficult one, isn't it? It seems very
hard to measure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hard to measure, I think. Because if you think about it, you're talking about stuff that sometimes isn't tangible. So it's very easy to say, I'll set something up, and if you do X, Y, and Z, I can match X, Y, and Z to the outcome. But we're talking human behaviour, which is much harder to measure. Like, it's much harder to control in some respects. Managers losing sleep about usually human behaviour, not about somebody hasn't written something correctly. It's usually because somebody's upset somebody else. It's because it's the human behaviour side of it. I think it's actually more tangible. It's not very tangible to measure. And I think, why people like you and I work is that in a business, this probably sits most comfortably within human resources. But in fairness, most human resource departments are doing what I call old style personnel, dealing with sickness and disciplinaries and all of what I call the bread and butter stuff of resource management. And I think because it's not so tangible, I think people struggle to set up that resource internally. I think it's easier to bring somebody in. And I think it just gets a bit lost somewhere.
No, I agree. How, you said yourself you've got so much experience doing this. So what changes have you seen throughout your time in developing people? Are we on the right trajectory broadly?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at some of the changes, for me, there's a lot around ownership. So, I probably entered the business world in this area where people were sent on courses and people rocked up. I mean, when I worked in London in banking, people used to come on come down on a Sunday night, check into a hotel, turn up Monday morning and sort of wonder why they were in the classroom type thing. And of course, I was delivering then before facilitation had hit us. So NatWest was one of the, we had something called joint application development. So we had a joint application development team, which really was facilitation in its truest form.
Yeah.
And it was a separate department, separate from training, because we were trainers. That probably was the only job description we had at the time, because people hadn't discovered facilitation.
Yeah.
And then there was this discovery of facilitation, and it came into banking as joint application development. And I think what was interesting was that created a shift. So I think rather than people turning up on a Monday morning, coming into a classroom, where in fairness, if I and my colleagues were delivering the same course, we'd all be saying the same thing at the same time. Yeah. And you could sort of time it through the day. So if you dropped into a classroom at 10 o'clock, everybody would be doing the same thing at 10 o'clock. Yeah. And I think there was a shift with facilitation coming in and a more coaching approach, because people then started to take more ownership around their learning and development. Not everybody wants to do that. Yeah. But I think that's the shift I've seen. And for me, it's a bit like rowing. You know, we always talk about athlete-led coaching. And, you know, in fairness, there's a lot of coaches who instruct. But if someone is in charge of their own destiny, so to speak, the productivity, I think, is greater. The development is greater. It might be slightly slower, but there's something about the motivation that comes from personal ownership. So I think if you can be in charge of your destiny, even though I think for some people it's quite strange and hard, because it's easier to ask somebody, what should I do, rather than explore it. But if you're prepared to do the exploration, I think the changes in business are far greater. Yeah. But the problem you're up against all the time, whether you're on a sports field, on a river like I am, or in business, is time. So, you know, I'm here for an hour. What can you give me in that hour that I can then take away? And if it's something that doesn't appear to be tangible, and I haven't given you the knowledge I've got in my head, not that knowledge, you know, is going to be, that knowledge might not be right for you. Yeah. There is a perception that I haven't had anything then, because you've asked me a few questions, but I've coached you or facilitated a discussion, which hopefully has allowed you to think about something. So I think that's where I see the greater gain. But I still think it's a challenge. So I think, you know, in businesses and sport, wherever it is, I still think that's a great challenge, because it's human being. We can be lazy, actually. It's easier to rock up and say, tell me what to do.
Of course it is.
And then I'll go away and do it. But the problem is you go away and do it, and you may not actually agree with what's happening. And you know, what's the gain? You're just going and doing something that somebody's instructed you to do. I don't understand the personal gain there. Yes, it moves something forward, but personally, where do you gain from that? Not really. I think it's quite a lazy approach, but we have to, it's hard sometimes to sell the non-lazy approach when I have a finite time. So, you know, if you come in on a workshop and I've got 2 hours, it's sort of, what can you give me in 2 hours? Now, the fact I could have a really good discussion that might encourage you to think things differently, or go away and think things through and then take ownership and do something. For me, that's a greater gain. Yeah. But I think there is an element of our human self, which says, actually, it's quicker for you to just give me some stuff and then I can take it away. Yeah. No, I agree. You don't have ownership.
Yeah, and that's probably the battle that we are facing. And I think it's really relevant right now. And the point about time, I think, and again, this is just my personal opinion, you know, time-based fees sort of reiterates that you need that tangible. Okay, I'm paying for 2 hours because I'm paying for time rather than value. Because, you know, we deal in data sort of thing, or people want to see numbers, and because they're still in that industrial mindset, we haven't quite shifted away from it fully yet.
No. And again, you know, it goes back to, how do you measure it? So, if I come to you, Ash, and you tell me how to do something, I can measure that, because I can say, well, I went to Ash today, I paid him X amount of money for 2 hours, he gave me this, I've gone away, put it, so it's a very much a transactional type of environment, where I think the greater gain is through providing an environment where people have to think and have to explore for themselves with help. Because it's, if you take, so, if I take an example in rowing, so as a young girl, I used to coach, and she was struggling to balance the boat. So they're very fine boats we use. And I followed her down. I could see what was wrong. And it would be really easy for me to get to the end of the river, sit down, we have a chat, and for me to say, well, actually, you need to do this. And I refused to do that. So she sort of said to me, well, I don't understand, Tracy, I can't balance the boat, I'm feeling as if I'm going to capsize any minute, I'm really not sure. So I can see probably what was wrong. So the coaching conversation is then, well, okay, so what helps you balance the boat? So then she started thinking about it, and I said, well, how does that all feel? And then she came up with the one area where I felt was the issue. So well, let's explore that then. Let's do another length of the river, and you concentrate on that element. What are you going to do differently? She did it differently. We went up, and she sat at the end and said, oh, that's great. Yeah, it's worked now. I don't feel much better. She said, I realise now that that's what I needed to do. But her sense of achievement, because she had solved her problem with the assistance of someone else, was far, far greater than her sitting in a boat and me saying, well, actually, you need to do this. And she'd go, okay, then go up. And then she would have said, oh, that's good, that worked. But the sense of achievement was way, way different.
And also the sensory learning as well from doing it yourself. And if we take learning to walk as a child, we don't teach our kids how to walk, do we? We coach them through it by guiding them.
Drag them along.
But it's probably the most simplistic analogy to use, I think, that you learn by doing. Experiential learning, as we're seeing more and more evidence now, is the best way to learn. And so how do we do that transformational learning in it, whether there's still this transactional environment that people want X for Y? So,
and I think it's that we have to shift. And it is hard, because time is money, in fairness, in business. So, but I don't see the gain of, and to be honest, let's face it, if you go into a business and tell somebody how to run their business, they'll probably very clearly tell you where to go.
Rightly so.
And how many consultants have been into businesses and been brought in to look at what's wrong, drawn up a report that tells you what's wrong in your business. I would question how much change then happens from that. Now, obviously, you can have an action plan that comes out of it. You can put your change in. But I think the people aren't owning it.
No.
Go back. But it's this sort of carrot stick approach, which for me isn't particularly healthy within an organisation.
Absolutely.
I would rather go in as a consultant and work alongside people and say, well, actually, what are your, how would you do it differently? And us have the coaching conversation so they come up with a solution, rather than me just go in as a business consultant and say, this is what's wrong with your organisation. I don't think that's particularly helpful, but we know it happens. I'm not sure that's, I don't think, I think there just becomes a lot of agitation and angst,
I agree, but that's auditable, isn't it? If I've paid big company X to come in and there's a big report, I've spent a lot of money on this report, and that tells me exactly what we're doing wrong, brilliant, I'll file it, and it's there for me to audit it, but we're not actually going to do anything about it.
Well, it was interesting, a number of years ago, a colleague said to me, we were bidding for some work, a guy I used to do some work with, and we went to a very big organisation, 10,000 staff, and the whole driver was to change the culture, which I found quite amusing as a concept. And I remember sitting, we had to sort of present what we would do, And the director said, well, you know, this is all very well and good, but we've got 3 months to change the culture within our organisation. And I said, that's not going to happen. I said, you can't change culture. You can only influence a change in culture by changing some of the things and the ways you do things, which will influence people to behave in a different way. And the person said to me, well, we've had other companies here today who've told us they can change the culture in 3 months. And I said, well, they perhaps should demonstrate how they're going to do that, because I don't believe you can do that. But if it's a quick fix thing and somebody's telling you at the top, we need somebody in to change the culture, you've got 3 months to do it. I mean, to be honest, you're foolish if you think you can do that. But, you know, it seems a very tangible thing, isn't it? So get a consultant in who can do something for 3 months and it'll all be changed. But, you know, workforce of 10,000, that's an interesting one. So, yeah, it was quite funny because I stepped away from that one.
Even with the workforce, I think you dodged the bullet there. Even with a workforce of 10, you know, this is where, and I suppose it's up to us to educate those people in authority, isn't it? That culture is an emergent property.
Yeah.
It emerges because of what you do as a leader, and it transcends across the organisation of those that walk their talk and live the values. It might not be the values that you've written on the wall, but they're the values of the organisation, which is again another dichotomy that people try to force these values upon the people that, you know, aren't the true values of the organisation. Final point, if you don't mind, to quickly wrap up, you've touched on it already, is your coaching style. And I know we've had a previous conversation where the differences between them. But again, I'm interested, if you wouldn't mind, just elaborate a little bit on, you know, what motivates you to coach and what little things that you use, perhaps.
So I try to work on coaching in as much as working with the individual on whatever it is that they bring to the table. So it's their issue, their problem that needs they need to solve. And I try as much as possible to ask questions, not give answers. So that is my approach. I do think there are times when you probably have to go into a slightly different mode. I think sometimes, I'm thinking about sport in particular, there might be, for a health and safety perspective, that you need to go into instructor mode, because to do that, you know, that requires that. And that could happen in business as well.
Absolutely.
I try to always focus on someone else's agenda. So I think it's really interesting. So I've been doing some coaching in the last couple of weeks, and a couple of people have sort of said to me, so you're the coach, tell me what I need to work on. And that's been quite interesting, because I've just sort of batted back and said, no, this is your session. You tell me what it is that you want to explore and work on. I'm not going to tell you. I don't know you well enough to, and it's not the role of a coach to do that. So I think we still have potentially a society, you know, of human beings who, for ease and speed, would rather you tell them what they need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think increasingly, I think that's as coaches, I think that's really quite hard for us, because I think if you look at really what coaching is, it's about providing that environment for exploration on somebody's issues. So it is about powerful questions and good questioning technique. But I think quite often we can feel forced into making a decision for someone. And that is something I try to be very careful about, because I'm very conscious that, you know, it's a bit like giving people advice. I'm very conscious about giving advice, because advice that might work for me might not work for you, because our life experience is different. Our competency level at all sorts of qualities is different. our confidence levels will be different. So, you know, if I told you to do something because I think that's good advice, that might be good advice for me. It could actually create bigger problems for you because you're not at the same point in whatever situation as I am. So I do try to do that. But I think as a coach, you have to also be aware of sometimes it's like having permission to come away from it because you need to state something or say something which is important at that moment in time, but then come back to the style.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I use my daughter's my perfect muse for my coaching. You know, I try and, with the best of will and the good intentions, to try and coach her through her life, but there are times where you have to be direct and authoritative. But then I always try and bring it back to coach around why I did that reaction and why we're in this situation now, to learn from it and then move on. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And, you know, I think a good coach can flick in and out of it. It's a useful skill, like you say, because sometimes you just have to get the point across and then you can pull the learning from it. Excellent.
But I think using, particularly with children, actually, I've got a friend who has brought her children up purely on the sort of action consequence model. So, you know, if a child does something wrong, what did you do? What was the consequence of you saying that or doing that? What would you do differently next time? And so uses that model very successfully. And I think, you know, that's an important thing because I think it's about reflection. But I think with all of this, it is developing skills which require time. And I think, you know, we can think that, you know, you and I might think really value reflection because we understand how important that is. But when somebody's, you know, up against it because life is busy and work is busy and you're asking them to go away and reflect for an hour and they'll think, oh, I haven't got time to do that. You tell me what it is that I need to reflect on or do differently because that's quicker. So it's the classic laziness really of life because life's busy.
It's that what's the word of it? Short-term gain, isn't it, rather than infinite gain? Yeah,
and I'm not, you know, I think increasingly life is so busy and people have so much on their plate. I think it creates a very difficult environment for us as coaches. You know, if you take sport, for example, you know, some people I coach have only got an hour a week to do what they do. So do I have a coaching conversation with them, which in fact they might not perceive they've gained anything? Or if I told them at the outset, you need to work at this because that's what you did wrong last time, then they probably would feel the value of that hour was greater than having a coaching conversation with me that might mean after half an hour they get to the bit that they acknowledge the bit that we wanted to acknowledge, but I could have told them that at the beginning. And I think it is all around time and laziness, which, and I know it's quite a strong word, laziness, and no one wants to think they're lazy, but I think that's what it comes down to. You know, if you've got a finite time to make the most of it, is actually if you tell me what it is I need to do, that's good use of my time then, because I've got an answer straight away. But if we have lots of conversation around questions and I might not get to that answer until the end of the hour, well, that seems like a bit of a waste. It isn't, because I think ultimately there is satisfaction that you've found the answer yourself. Of course there is. But I think sometimes it gets lost. Really.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. And I think with the coaching process, you might learn a hell of a lot more than the one point that, you know, if I told you what was wrong or what you need to work on, you learn one thing, whereas if we have this exploration, you might learn 10 things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. That was fantastic. thank you very much for sharing your insights with me. I love it. It was a really good conversation. I've made a hell of a lot of notes to write up for the show notes as well. Final one, Tracy, is there somewhere, if people want to find out more about you as a consultant, where do they go to, or how can
LinkedIn.
Okay.
LinkedIn, really. Yeah. I don't have websites or anything fancy like that.
That's fine. I'll make
you
sure.
Find me on the Westminster Associates website, but apart from that, yeah, just go into LinkedIn. But
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll put that into the write-up at the end. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Okay, cool.
Right. Thanks, Ash.